The glass doors of the dealership slid open with a soft hiss, and a man stepped inside. He walked with quiet confidence, his clothes simple, his eyes steady, taking in the rows of gleaming cars under fluorescent lights. The hum of sales chatter dimmed for a moment as heads turned. To most, he was just another visitor, but to the man behind the manager's desk, he was an unwelcome intrusion. The manager rose abruptly, his polished shoes clicking on the tile as he strode forward. His smile, the one reserved for customers he deemed worthy, never surfaced. Instead, his jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and his voice cut through the air with practiced disdain. "You don't belong here. Get out before I call security." The words echoed in the cavernous showroom, sharp and humiliating. Conversations halted. An employee halfway through pitching a financing plan froze, watching the scene unfold. Two interns exchanged nervous glances, sensing the electric crackle of conflict. The silence was louder than any engine roaring to life. The man who had just been insulted did not flinch. He did not lower his gaze or stumble for a reply. Instead, he stood still, his posture straight, his calm presence a stark contrast to the storm of arrogance in front of him. His eyes held no rage, no fear, only patience, the kind of patience forged over years of being underestimated. The manager, emboldened by what he mistook for weakness, stepped closer. His voice rose, dripping with condescension. "I said leave. People like you waste our time. This is not a place for window shoppers. Don't make me ask again." Every syllable revealed more about the man speaking than the one he sought to demean. His arrogance filled the room, suffocating, desperate to assert dominance. Yet, beside him stood a man unmoved, his silence louder than any retort. The employees looked on, torn between discomfort and curiosity, sensing something unusual beneath the surface of this exchange. It was more than a customer-manager spat, it was a collision of two worlds, one propped up by prejudice, the other grounded in dignity. And then, as the tension thickened to breaking point, the narrator's voice cut in. What the manager didn't know was that this man already owned everything around him. The dealership gleamed like a temple of excess. Rows of polished chrome reflected the ceiling lights in sharp, blinding streaks. Sales banners hung proudly, promising once-in-a-lifetime deals, while behind the desks, smiles flashed that were as polished as the vehicles themselves, smiles trained, rehearsed, and wielded like tools. Every corner of the showroom whispered the same message: image is everything. But image, as always, is selective. Customers in designer suits were greeted with handshakes and coffee offers. Families who arrived in modest cars were tolerated but never truly valued. And for those who didn't fit the unspoken image of who belonged, the mask of friendliness slipped quickly, revealing the contempt hidden beneath. It was here, among the glossy paint jobs and inflated price tags, that a deeper truth revealed itself. The dealership was more than a place to buy cars. It was a stage where prejudice still strutted proudly, dressed in the clothes of commerce. A manager's dismissive tone. A salesman who conveniently forgets to mention the best financing options. A customer left waiting while others are served first. These are the quiet, cutting ways dignity is stolen, one interaction at a time. The insult hurled at the man who walked through those glass doors wasn't just a single act of arrogance. It was the embodiment of a system that decides worth based on appearances. The manager's words carried centuries of weight, echoing patterns that have long defined who gets access, who gets respect, and who gets pushed to the margins. "You don't belong here," he had said. And in those 4 words, he spoke not only for himself but for every gatekeeper who ever used power to exclude. The employees who stood frozen knew it too. Some had seen it before, in subtler forms. A customer brushed off. A resume dismissed. A complaint ignored. This wasn't new, it was just louder this time. Yet the man on the receiving end of this humiliation refused to be broken by it. He stood in the middle of the showroom like an anchor in a storm, refusing to be moved by the winds of arrogance swirling around him. That dignity unsettled the room even more than the insult itself. How could he remain so calm in the face of such disrespect? What did he know that no one else did? And it was in that calm where the stakes began to shift. Because this moment was no longer about a single man being belittled in a dealership. It was about every instance where pride met prejudice, where silence met arrogance, where appearances misled the arrogant into revealing their own smallness. This wasn't just one man's insult, it was a mirror of America's ongoing struggle with dignity and discrimination. The audience in that dealership, the employees, the customers pretending not to watch, felt it in their bones. They weren't just witnessing a clash of personalities. They were watching history's oldest conflict play out in real time, power against principle, arrogance against resilience. And though the manager believed he was in control, puffing himself up with every cutting remark, he was standing on the edge of a revelation that would shatter the very foundation of his authority. Because the balance of power was about to flip in a way no one saw coming. The manager's name was Richard Dalton, though most of the staff simply called him Mr. D, behind his back, a title that carried as much mockery as respect. To the untrained eye, he looked like a success story: tailored suits, gold watch glinting under showroom lights, a toothy grin plastered across billboards advertising the dealership as your trusted family place. He sold the image of a man who had built his empire through grit and hard work. But those who worked under him knew the truth. Dalton's empire wasn't built on integrity. It was built on shortcuts, intimidation, and an ego that demanded constant feeding. He had clawed his way up the corporate ladder by stepping on the very people he now claimed to serve. Employees quickly learned that loyalty wasn't rewarded with fairness, it was rewarded with survival. Do what Dalton said, turn a blind eye to his outbursts, and you might keep your job. Cross him, and you'd find yourself on the receiving end of humiliation so cutting it lingered long after the words had faded. Richard prided himself on reading people, a skill he often boasted about in morning meetings. In reality, his so-called instincts were little more than snap judgments rooted in bias. He could size someone up in seconds, deciding whether they were a serious buyer or a waste of time. His criteria were never written, never spoken aloud, but everyone knew them. A certain kind of suit, a certain kind of watch, a certain kind of skin tone, those people got his best smile. Everyone else got a dismissive glance and the subtle, suffocating message that they were not welcome. The contradiction was glaring. On commercials, Dalton appeared with his arm around a smiling actor playing his son, telling viewers that the dealership was a family business where everyone is treated like kin. In reality, he ruled the showroom like a petty king, barking orders at salesmen, cutting commissions when profits dipped, and mocking customers he deemed unworthy. He was. Underneath the bravado was a deep insecurity. Dalton had always feared being overshadowed, and so he fought to control every room he entered. The dealership wasn't just his workplace, it was his stage. Each insult he hurled, each customer he dismissed, was another performance in the ongoing play where he cast himself as the lead. And like any bad actor, he couldn't see that the audience was growing tired of his act. He had long mistaken fear for respect. The silence of his employees, the nervous laughter of junior staff, the way customers bit their tongues when he spoke down to them, Dalton believed it all confirmed his dominance. What he never realized was that silence doesn't always mean submission. Sometimes it means people are waiting, watching, hoping for the moment when arrogance finally collapses under its own weight. That day, when the black man entered the showroom, Dalton's instincts snapped into their usual rhythm. He didn't see a potential owner, a leader, or a man who had fought his way to the top through determination and brilliance. He saw only what his prejudice allowed him to see, someone who didn't fit the polished image he guarded so obsessively. And in his mind, that was all he needed to know. He moved quickly, almost eagerly, as if the humiliation itself was a performance for his staff. He wanted to remind them who held power in the building. The arrogance wasn't just casual, it was ritual. Each insult reaffirmed his delusion of control. He thought himself untouchable, so deeply rooted in authority that nothing could shake him. But arrogance, as history often proves, is blinding. Dalton never imagined that the man standing before him had already rewritten the script. He didn't notice the quiet strength in the man's eyes, didn't recognize the subtle authority in his posture. All he saw was an opportunity to flex the same tired routine he had run countless times before. He thought this day was just another chance to flex his control, to feed th. His name was Marcus Reed, and long before he ever set foot inside that gleaming dealership, life had been shaping him for this moment. He grew up in a small 2-bedroom house on the south side of the city, where opportunity rarely knocked, and when it did, it came dressed as hard labor. His father worked nights as a security guard, coming home with weary eyes and a tired smile, while his mother juggled shifts at a diner, slipping folded dollars into a coffee tin labeled, "For Marcus." That tin wasn't just about money. It was about hope, their quiet way of saying, "Your life will be bigger than this." Marcus understood sacrifice before he understood multiplication tables. He saw his parents' hands rough with work, their backs bent under the weight of bills, their pride refusing to bow. They never had much, but what they gave him was priceless, the unshakable belief that dignity mattered more than anything. His mother would say, "People may try to shrink you, but never let them decide your size." Those words became a compass, pointing him forward through every storm. School was a battlefield of underestimation. Teachers told him to aim realistic. Classmates whispered that kids from his neighborhood didn't end up running companies, they ended up running from problems. Marcus didn't argue. He let their words settle like stones in his pocket, and then he used them as weight to build strength. When others slept, he studied. When others gave up, he pressed forward. He found odd jobs, mowing lawns, fixing neighbors' appliances, selling refurbished bikes he salvaged from junkyards. Each dollar earned wasn't just currency, it was proof that he could turn sweat into possibility. By the time he reached college, he was already hustling like a seasoned entrepreneur. He worked mornings in the library, afternoons delivering packages, and nights tutoring high school students who, like him, were told to settle for less. He graduated not with honors on paper, but with a resume written. Slowly, that shop grew into a chain. Each new location was a victory not just for Marcus, but for the people he employed, many of whom came from the same overlooked neighborhoods he once called home. He knew what it meant to be ignored, and so he vowed no one under his leadership would feel invisible. Success didn't make him arrogant, it made him intentional. And yet, even as his businesses flourished, Marcus never forgot the countless times he was mistaken for less than he was. He remembered walking into boardrooms only to be asked if he was here to make a delivery. He remembered dealerships where salesmen ignored him while rushing to shake the hands of men in tailored suits. He remembered the sting of invisibility, of being measured not by his mind but by their prejudice. Those memories never broke him. They sharpened him. So when the opportunity arose to purchase the very dealership where he once had been dismissed as a window shopper, Marcus didn't hesitate. This was more than an investment. It was a statement. For him, ownership wasn't about showing off wealth, it was about legacy, about rewriting the narrative his parents had sacrificed to make possible. Where others had closed doors, he would open them. Where arrogance had ruled, dignity would lead. Behind his calm demeanor lay years of silent battles, victories won without applause, resilience forged in the fire of doubt. To the outside world, he was just another man walking through glass doors in simple clothes. But beneath that surface was a history of defiance against every barrier set before him. Employees at the dealership would later say there was something different about him that day, though they couldn't name it. Perhaps it was the way he walked, not hurried, not hesitant, but steady, like someone who already knew the ground belonged to him. Or perhaps it was the look in his eyes, calm, measured, unbothered by insults, because he had faced far greater storms and walked out stronger every time. Marcus was not the kind of man who needed to announce his power. True strength never shouts, it simply stands, unmovable, unshaken, undeniable. That was the essence of Marcus Reed, the boy who grew up in a house held together by hope, the man who turned doubt into empire, the leader who valued dignity above dominance. And so, when he walked in that day, he wasn't there to be sold to, he was there to see who he'd be leading. The air inside the dealership felt heavier now, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Richard Dalton squared his shoulders, puffing himself up for the show he thought he was putting on. His voice carried, sharp and cutting, designed to draw eyes to the drama. And eyes did turn. Employees leaned half an inch closer, customers pretended to scroll their phones but couldn't help glancing up. A stage had formed, and Dalton, as always, believed himself the star. "I told you already," Dalton barked, his words slicing through the silence, "this place is for real customers. Not for people who come in here to gawk at cars they could never afford." His tone dripped with arrogance, but Marcus did not move. He stood where he was, hands calmly at his sides, eyes steady, his silence more powerful than a shouted rebuttal. Dalton mistook that silence for weakness, the way bullies often do, and pressed forward, his voice growing louder with each insult. "Do you know what these cars cost?" he sneered, gesturing toward a sleek sports model gleaming under showroom lights. "One of these vehicles is worth more than anything you'll see in your N." The words hung in the air like poison, and yet Marcus's composure remained unshaken. His calm was unnerving, like still water concealing depth too great to measure. He simply studied Dalton, his expression giving nothing away. That quiet defiance unsettled more than if he had shouted back. Dalton mistook the unease for victory. He smirked, turning slightly so his employees could witness his display of dominance. "This dealership runs on efficiency," he boasted. "I don't let distractions walk through those doors. Customers expect a certain kind of service, and I provide it. That's why we're number one in this region. We don't have time for strays." Several employees shifted uncomfortably at the word, though no one spoke. The tension was a rope pulled taut, each insult tightening the coil. Marcus took in every word, every gesture, and still he stood, patient, as if waiting for Dalton to finish burying himself beneath his own arrogance. Dalton, growing frustrated at the man's composure, stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh hiss. "I'm telling you now, leave. Before I make you leave. I don't care who you think you are, this place isn't for you." That final phrase cut deeper than Dalton realized, and the room felt it. The arrogance, the exclusion, the smug belief that he had the authority to decide who belonged, it was the raw mask of prejudice pulled tight across his face. Marcus finally shifted, not in anger but in quiet consideration, as though weighing whether Dalton's words were even worth a reply. His calm unsettled everyone. A receptionist near the front desk swallowed hard. A young salesman lowered his eyes, embarrassed to witness the cruelty unfold. The silence Marcus carried was more commanding than Dalton's entire performance. Dalton, blind to the shifting atmosphere, doubled down. "I built this place on standards," he declared, his voice once again loud and booming. "And I won't have those standards dragged down by people who have no business here. My customers are men of means, of success, people who actually contribute something. That's who deserves my attention. Not you." The venom in his words struck like a slap. And yet, Marcus did not flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't let the insults carve into his dignity. He simply let the silence thicken around them, a silence that made Dalton's bluster sound smaller, weaker, more desperate with each passing second. The insults piled higher, each one more reckless than the last, each one winding the coil tighter and tighter. And though Dalton thought himself in control, the truth was clear to everyone else watching. The manager was unraveling, exposing himself with every word, while Marcus remained unshaken, as though waiting for the precise moment to speak. The breaking point was coming, and the room was about to witness the unthinkable. The silence that followed Dalton's last insult felt suffocating. It was the kind of silence that stretches, grows heavy, demands resolution. The dealership, once filled with the hum of sales chatter and the metallic gleam of possibility, now seemed to shrink around the two men at its center. Marcus stood unmoving, his calm presence forming a quiet wall against Dalton's torrent of arrogance. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of a wall clock above the reception desk, each second dragging like a drumbeat. Marcus drew in a breath, slow and steady, his gaze never leaving the man who had tried so hard to belittle him. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to puff out his chest. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, deliberate, heavy with a gravity that cut deeper than any shout could. "Are you finished?" The simplicity of the question startled the room. Dalton blinked, caught off guard by the man's composure. He opened his mouth to unleash another insult, but Marcus lifted a hand, not in aggression, but in quiet authority. The gesture alone was enough to halt the manager mid-breath. "You keep telling me I don't belong here," Marcus continued, his tone even, unhurried. "That I shouldn't waste your time. That this place isn't for me." He paused, letting the words settle over the crowd. Employees leaned in, sensing something shifting, something about to break open. "But what you don't know, what you never bothered to consider, is that this place already belongs to me." A murmur rippled through the room, soft at first, then growing louder as employees turned to one another in disbelief. Dalton laughed, a nervous, brittle sound, desperate to reassert control. "What nonsense are you talking about?" he scoffed. "You think you can just walk in here and—" Marcus reached calmly into the inside pocket of his jacket. The motion was unhurried, deliberate, each second adding to the mounting suspense. He pulled out a slim folder, the dealership's logo embossed on the cover. Slowly, he opened it, revealing neatly bound legal documents stamped with signatures and seals. He held them up, his voice quiet but carrying across the room. "These are the papers," he said, confirming the transfer of ownership. "Effective last week, this dealership, every car on this floor, every desk, every paycheck, belongs to me." The effect was instantaneous. The room froze. Salesmen stiffened mid-step, receptionists stopped typing, even customers who had been pretending not to watch now turned fully toward the scene. It was as though time itself had paused to let the weight of the revelation sink in. Dalton's face drained of color. His smirk faltered, his jaw slackened, his confidence evaporating before the eyes of the very people he had spent years trying to impress. That's impossible," he stammered, voice cracking. I would have known." Marcus slipped a key fob from the same folder, its silver gleam catching the light. He placed it gently on the counter between them, the sound of it hitting the surface echoing like a gavel striking wood. "This is the master key," Marcus said. "The one given to the owner. My name is Marcus Reed. And from this day forward, I am the one you answer to." The whispers swelled into a low chorus. Employees exchanged glances, some wide-eyed, some stifling smirks, others letting out the breath they'd been holding for years. A young salesman in the corner hid a grin behind his hand. The receptionist who had swallowed hard earlier now sat a little straighter, a faint look of relief washing across her face. For them, this wasn't just a revelation, it was vindication. Dalton staggered back a step, his polished shoes squeaking against the tile. His hands twitched at his sides, grasping for words that refused to. Dalton's lips moved, but no sound emerged. His bravado had dissolved into panic, his authority into ash. The very stage he had built for his dominance had become the scene of his downfall. He looked around desperately, searching for an ally, a lifeline, but found only the eyes of his staff, eyes that no longer feared him, eyes that now saw him for what he truly was. Marcus closed the folder, tucking it neatly back into his jacket. His movements were unhurried, controlled, the actions of a man who knew he held the room not by force, but by truth. He let the silence linger, the lesson settle. Then, with quiet finality, he spoke. "This dealership is not your kingdom anymore. It is a place of work, a place of service, a place where every person who walks through those doors deserves respect. That begins today." The room seemed to exhale all at once. The tension that had coiled so tightly now unraveled, replaced by something new, hope, possibility, the sense that change had finally come. Employees looked at Marcus not with fear, but with admiration. The villain who had loomed so large only moments ago now stood diminished, his arrogance reduced to rubble. Dalton opened his mouth again, desperate to reclaim some shred of control, but the words never came. He was no longer the man commanding the room. He was a man exposed, his power shattered by the very truth he had mocked. And as Marcus stood there, calm and resolute, the audience, both inside that dealership and beyond, knew instinctively, this was only the beginning. And that was only the beginning of the shockwaves to come.